Okay, let's go ahead and begin inshallah ta'ala. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين وبعد. Oh, it won't fall inshallah. طيب. We stopped at where the author was still covering the shurut of wudu, and we stopped where he said وَخَامِسُهَا, and the fifth. Now, I told you in the beginning that the shurut of wudu are divided into two groups, for the average person and then for a person with continuous hadath, meaning continuously his body is releasing things that would negate his wudu. Tamam? And we said there are a total of 17, and the author summarized them down. I broke them down into 5 points. And in our last class, we covered the conditions for the average person. Now, when it comes to the person with continuous release of things that nullify his wudu, this could be gas, could be urine, etc., could be bleeding. This is called da'imul hadath. And sometimes our ulama will refer to them as salas, which is basically urine leakage, or istihada, which is bleeding in days other than the days of the menses, the period, the monthly period. Why would they usually mention these two? Because these are the most common things that we see when dealing with people in this matter. He says وَخَامِسُهَا دُخُولُ وَقْتٍ لِدَائِمِ حَدَثٍ كَسَلَسٍ وَمُسْتَحَاضَةٍ. Number 5 is, so it's the beginning of the shurut of da'imul hadath, is the entry of the time. So in our last one, we covered the first 13, and we said the next 4 pertain to this person that's da'imul hadath. The first one of these 4 is dukhul al-waqt. Know this as a qa'ida. Everything that we say about a person that's using tayammum applies to the person with da'im al-hadath, which is the entry of the time and the fact that his purification is only valid for one obligatory act. So if there's a second obligatory act that they want to do, they'll have to redo this process that we're about to share with you in a minute. Okay? Same thing with tayammum. When you do tayammum, it's only good for one obligatory act. Now, why are we telling da'imul hadath that he needs to wait until, or she needs to wait until the time of prayer has entered? Because tahara is not an obligation upon us unless the time of prayer has entered. So when we make wudu, the average person, the person without continuous hadath, makes wudu, they're going out of their way to prepare for the salah. But the actual law states it's only an obligation upon you to make wudu once the time of the ibadah has entered. Now, since this individual with continuous hadath or with tayammum, because again, I told you the rules here apply here, are doing something exceptional that does not really change their state. Tayammum does not take you out of hadath to tahara. No, that's not what happens. Tayammum allows you to perform the act of ibadah. That's what it is by definition. And the same thing for a person with continuous hadath. They are being allowed to do the ibadah, not that they are changing the state of impurity. So because that is the case, they are only allowed to initiate this act of tahara once the time of the prayer has entered. The author then says, وَيُشْتَرَطُ لَهُ أَيْضًا ظَنُّ دُخُولِهِ. And really it's the same thing. So the time of prayer has entered, or you assume that the time of prayer has entered. So it's going to be the same thing. So we're talking about you are certain versus you have غَلَبَةُ الظَّنِّ, meaning you assume based upon the factors that you have looked into that the time of prayer has indeed entered. He says, فَلَا يَتَوَضَّأُ, meaning da'imul hadath, كَالْمُتَيَمِّمِ, like the person doing tayammum, لِفَرْضٍ أَوْ نَفْلٍ مُؤَقَّتٍ قَبْلَ وَقْتِ فِعْلِهِ, So he cannot make wudu, and the person doing tayammum cannot do tayammum for an obligatory act or for a timed ibadah. What's a timed ibadah? Like Salat al-Eid. That's a timed ibadah that is sunnah. تمام. It's called nafl mu'aqqat. So just as a refresher, we spoke about this in the beginning, but just as a refresher, we have an obligatory prayer, which is your 5 daily prayers, and on Friday is Jum'ah for men, tamam, or women that decide to go to the masjid instead of dhuhr. It's not a replacement of dhuhr, it's a separate prayer taking the time of dhuhr, okay, for us in the Shafi'i school. Other schools differ with us on that point. Then you have a nadr prayer, a prayer that you say, I take an oath by Allah that I'm going to do these 2 prayers for His sake, 2 rak'ahs for His sake. That becomes a nadr for you. That becomes an obligatory act for you. Tamam? That is also an obligation. Then you have something called fardu kifaya. Now, fardu kifaya might be a complete prayer, or it might be an act that you do the prayer, like congregational prayer. Okay? Janazah prayer is fardu kifaya. Then you have your sunan. Your sunan are divided into different categories depending on what we are referring to. There can be sunan, or we could divide it based upon timing. So there's before and after obligatory prayers. There is connected to time events like lunar and solar eclipses, or like the Eid prayers. And there can be nafl or sunnah prayers that you do for a certain act that you do, like entering the masjid. And then there are sunnah prayers that are not connected to anything, but for the mere fact that you want to get up and pray. And that's called nafl mu'aqqat. One prayer in the obligatory prayers I didn't mention, and that is a make-up prayer, but that should be self-explanatory. If there's an obligatory prayer upon you, whether you're fulfilling it or you're making up, it is still an obligation prayer, and that's why I didn't break it down that way. Tamam? He says, وقت فعله. So if you're doing, for example, lunar eclipse and you're da'im al-hadath, or you're doing tayammum, you'll have to wait for the eclipse to begin. What about Eid? You have to wait for them to begin in order for you to do the tahara for it. قال ولصلاة جنازة قبل الغسل. Funeral prayer, when does that begin? After they wash the deceased, after they wash the body. He says, وَلَزِمَ وَضُوءَانِ أَوْ تَيَمُّمَانِ عَلَى خَطِيبٍ دَائِمَ الْحَدَثِ. So a khatib, يوم الجمعة, the person giving the lecture, if he is da'im al-hadath, or there's no water and he's doing tayammum, he's going to have to do 2, because he needs to have tahara to give the khutbah. This is something a lot of people don't know or not aware of. But the khatib needs to maintain his wudu for the khutbah. And he needs to have wudu for the prayer. And for the khatib, once he's the assigned khatib, it is either agreed upon or he is going up onto the minbar. It goes from fardu kifaya to fard ayn, because he's the one that's going to do it. And as soon as that's the case, that means he needs to keep his tahara or do tahara. So he would have to go and make tayammum and then get on to the minbar. And then when he's done, he would have to go make tayammum and come back and lead the salah. Well, if he's da'im al-hadath, he's going to have to make wudu, give the khutbah, go make wudu, and then come back and lead the salah. Tamam? He says, أحدهما للخطبتين والآخر بعدهما لصلاة الجمعة ويكفي واحد لهما لغيره. يعني, the person that's not da'im al-hadath, he can make one wudu, and that will be suffice, of course, for the khutbah and the salah. So he says, وَيَكْفِي وَاحِدٌ, meaning one wudu, لَهُمَا, meaning for the lectures, and the salah, لِغَيْرِهِ, for a person other than دائم الحدث. وَيَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ الْوُضُوء لِكُلِّ فَرْضٍ كَالْمُتَيَمِّمِ, and he's going to have to redo a wudu every time he wants to pray an obligatory prayer, if he has prayed with the previous one an obligatory prayer, like the person that's doing tayammum. But what else does he have to do? وكذا غسل الفرج وإبدال القطنة التي بفمه والعصابة وإن لم تزل عن موضعها. Now, I read through the whole thing without breaking it down, because what is he trying to say? This is going to change with time, and this is something that we need to understand. A person with continuous leakage, whether urine, blood, whatever it might be, they're going to have to clean that area and repad it. Tamam? They're going to have to repad it every time they come to make wudu. I know it's complex, I know it's hard, but there's no other way around it. And this is how the rukhsah of them praying is actually going to work. Tamam? Now he describes ghasl al-farj, washing the area basically where the continuous hadath is being released. وَإِبْدَالُ الْقُطْنَ الَّتِي بِفَمِهِ. So that's stuffing, like tampons and things of that nature, if they can use it. If they can't use it, like it's going to harm them, or if she's fasting, she can't use a tampon when she's fasting. So, we're only going to use that in certain circumstances. But if you have proper padding or diapers and things of that nature, you can definitely use those, but they will have to be changed when you go to make wudu, even if they were not used. Even if they were not used, it is a condition, because the Prophet ﷺ, he told Zainab bint Jahsh, who was suffering from istihada, اغسلي فرجك وعصبيها ثم توضئي للصلاة. Wash the area, pad it up, and then make your wudu. And that was the instructions he gave her, and that's how it was always understood. وعلى نحو سلس مبادرة بالصلاة. Okay, now before I explain this point goes beyond just what this sentence is saying, and that is al-muwala fil af'al. He doesn't really expand on it, but these are one of the things that is understood from what he's saying. Other ulama have mentioned this, and I shared the list with everyone in Telegram. So this is al-muwala, and the process works as follows. A person with da'im al-hadath wants to pray. They're going to go and immediately, no breaks, no pauses, wash the private area, repad it. And then immediately, no breaks, no talking on the phone, no texting, nope. Immediately, right after that, make wudu. And then immediately after that, dress for the salah. And immediately after that, pray. He's speaking about that last part. After you made your wudu, after you got dressed and you're about to pray. If you delay, how does that impact? And why are we saying immediately? Because the whole thing is a license, it's a rukhsah. Technically, the individual is not lifting the state of impurity. So in order for the rukhsah to work, you need to maintain all of the details as was stated in the hadith. Tamam? He says, وَعَلَى نَحْوِ سَلَسٍ مُبَادَرَةٍ بِالصَّلَاةِ فَلَوْ أَخَّرَهَا لِمَصْلَحَتِهَا كَانْتِظَارِ جَمَاعَةٍ أَوْ جُمْعَةٍ وَإِنْ أُخِّرَتْ عَنْ أَوَّلِ الْوَقْتِ وَكَذِهَابٍ إِلَى مَسْجِدٍ لَمْ يَضُرُّ. But if they delay it, and see the reason why he mentioned salas and didn't mention mustahada, hopefully you noticed that point. He says, وَعَلَى نَحْوِ سَلِسٍ. He's trying to refer to the male, because the male would run into more things that would delay them more. But realistically, it could apply to male or female. But if you'll notice, he focused it on male just because you're going to go to the masjid, you're going to wait for the jama'ah, you might sit and wait for the imam, you might go and listen to khutbat al-jum'ah first, there might be some sort of delay, and so on. If the delay is for the purpose of the salah, like waiting for the jama'ah, that's okay. Like going to the masjid, that's okay. Male or female. He's only using male just because it's more common. But it's male or female. There's no difference between them. If they're waiting, like for example, she's at home and she's praying with her husband, and he's taking forever to make wudu, and she's waiting for him. That's okay. That does not impact. Even though we just said there should be no breaks in between the acts, because her waiting is for what? For the salah. His waiting in the masjid is for the salah. But say, no, it wasn't that. He was instead talking with someone. No, then you're going to have to redo the whole process, because your delay was not prayer related. Tamam? And that concludes everything about the shurut. Anything that he missed, I gave it to you, and we went into them, alhamdulillah, in depth and detail. Now we're going to begin on furud al-wudu. And as in every section, I want you to end this section of furud, like every section we've done so far, leaving with fiqh and understanding. And you will get a lot of questions, inshallah ta'ala, on this matter. Wudu, aside from the exclusions and maybe scenarios that you might have never even heard of in your life. Wudu is something that we do every single day. As a matter of fact, we try to maintain it even beyond the 5 prayers. So every Muslim should have these, have the matters of wudu mastered. Tamam? I won't go in too deep, we'll stay snorkeling, but pay attention and come out from this section a person that has fiqh of wudu. He says, وَفُرُوضُهُ سِتَّةٌ. Ibn Hajar tells us in the Tuhfa, 4 are in the Quran and 2 are in the Sunnah. However, some of our ashab before him said all 6 can actually be understood from the ayah in the Quran. Why? Because the ayah starts and says what? إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ. That shows intent. There's your niyyah. Then it gives us a set of actions, 4 actions. Washing the face, washing the arms, right? And then wiping the head, and then washing the feet. Okay. Arabs, when they give you a sequence of actions that vary and change, they mean to keep sequence. Like the purpose here, the purpose of how they are expressing it is to maintain sequence. So the ayah itself indicates sequence. Therefore, that's your last one. That's a tartib. So there you go. They're all really in the Quran. And they're in the Sunnah. Tamam. He says, أحدها. The first one, نية وضوء. النية is the intention in the heart. And we normally learn different rules about niyyah when we study the niyyah. The first thing is, what do we mean by niyyah? Niyyah means the intent to do something for a certain purpose. Oh, but the ulama mention wording. Yes, they don't mean the exact wording. You don't have to stop and pause and in your heart say, I intend to do X for X. No, it means the reason why you're doing X is for X, and that's present in your heart. That's literally what they mean. Tamam? That's the haqiqah of the niyyah. And that's what the majority of the Shafi'iyya say. Now, you will see a difference of opinion on how far do you take that intent in your heart. But Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, the teacher of Imam al-Ghazali, he says we shouldn't explain and break down what is, because at the end of the day, it's just your intent behind the act that you're doing. That's it. It's that simple. So we should stop there. We shouldn't dive deeper than that. Ibn Salah had an issue with some of the ashab saying the niyyah means to intend someone. قصدك فلان فنواك. He said Arabs don't say that, but Imam al-Nawawi says his objection doesn't make sense because he later on agrees with them in another chapter. So all of our ashab simply say it is متعلق بالقصد, the intent behind of why you're doing something. It's that simple. There's no reason to go beyond that or to dig deeper than that. When do we do the niyyah? At the beginning of any act of ibadah, with exceptions in a couple chapters. We'll see inshallah ta'ala when we come across them. But normally it's at the beginning of any act. Tamam. How do we do it? It varies from one ibadah to the next, but they all normally start in the heart. Mumtaz. What's its purpose? Is so that way you can tell your ibadat apart, and you can also differentiate between what you do as an act of worship versus what you do out of habit. Tamam? And there you have everything that they really discuss in regards to the niyyah. And some of the ulama will break it down, some of them will turn it into poetry to help you remember that, but as you can see, it's very basic and simple and direct. But he says, one more thing. Niyyah has conditions. And the conditions of the niyyah are similar to the conditions that we've already discussed, except for a couple. I will mention, he doesn't really expand on. You need to be a Muslim, you need to have tamyiz, discernment, meaning that you're a child that has the ability to eat and drink and use the restroom on his own, so he knows what he's doing, so that way he can have an intent, right? And then the things that pertain to the niyyah in particular, and that is, you can't do something that normally breaks the niyyah. That would include the following: intending something else that would nullify the original intention, leaving it leaving what we call in Arabic ta'liq, meaning basing it off of someone else's actions or something else happening. Like, I'm going to make wudu unless my son comes. Yeah, that niyyah is not accepted because part of the intent is that it stays intact, and that would break the intactness. Even though it's for a future event, it breaks the yaqeen and certainty of having the intent in the first place. So you can't do that as well. And the last thing, and some do not consider this as a condition, but more of a sunnah, and that is that you keep that intent present in your heart to the end of the act. It's not really a condition, it's highly preferred that you have it present. Tamam. Or why you're doing wudu, what are you doing it for? Tamam. Now he starts giving us examples of niyyahs. And inshallah ta'ala, I will send you a list with every single type of intention that our ashab spoke about. So you can see in depth what they mean, and if they differed, what did they differ on? He says, niyat wudu'in. That was actually an example. That I just intend to make wudu, period. That is a sufficient intention. So you can go and make wudu, and in your heart, I intend to make wudu, period. That's really all you need. That's all you need. You can stop right there. That's fine. أو أداء فرض وضوء. Or you intend that you're doing the obligatory act of what? Of wudu. That's fine as well. The first one kind of it's indicated on its own. However, here the only difference is that you are thinking about, hey, this is an obligation upon me to do. أو رفع حدث لغير دائم الحدث. I intend to lift my state of impurity. But you can't be a person that has continuous impurity because that doesn't make sense. It's like intending something that cannot be fulfilled. That is a form of playing around with the Sharia. And any time you do a niyyah for something in a form that's playing around, your act is batil, and whatever you do afterwards as well is batil, and you sin. So you cannot lift the state of impurity. Why are you intending it? That makes no sense. Why would you do that? Now, if you did it by accident, it's understandable, but you'll still have to redo your act. If you did it on purpose, then you're playing around with the deen, and that is a grave sin. He says, حتى في الوضوء المجدد. This is the opinion of Ibn Hajar, that you can intend رفع الحدث, lifting the state of impurity, even if you're just renewing your wudu. What's renewing your wudu? It's making wudu while you already have your wudu. Tamam. And is this allowed? Yes, it is allowed. It's recommended, actually. It's where the statement nur ala nur comes from, right? However, some of the ulama argued that in order for that renewal of wudu to be valid, you should have used the first wudu in something that needed a wudu. Others say you don't necessarily need that, but I think it's a fair assessment to say you're doing the wudu again because you used that first wudu. So I want to make this next act of ibadah special, so I redo my wudu. That makes sense. Like there's a rational argument to be had there, but it's not necessarily necessary. Tamam. Al-Imam al-Ramli says, no, you cannot intend رفع الحدث when you're doing تجديد الوضوء. Why? Because you're not doing رفع الحدث, so there'll be a form of playing around. So in his view, he views this as a playing around. In Ibn Hajar's view, he says it's okay because even though you're not lifting the state of hadath, the expression رفع الحدث, changing my state of impurity, could be understood more in like maybe a metaphorical sense, or maybe it's just a frequently used intention for wudu, so it's okay to use. Or you could intend it for something that maybe I assume that I did, even though if I haven't. But that last one's a little bit problematic because it introduces uncertainty to the niyyah. We never want to introduce uncertainty to a niyyah, because once you introduce uncertainty to a niyyah, then you negate the niyyah itself. And that's very, very dangerous. So we never want to negate the niyyah itself. He says, أو الطهارة عنه, meaning عن الحدث, meaning I intend to purify myself from my hadath, my impurity. Okay? Well, what about if I just intend purity? I just intend tahara. The mu'tamad opinion is that niyyah is not going to be valid, because just washing my hands is considered tahara. Just taking a shower is tahara. That's not suffice. You need to specify it, or else it's no different than just using water on yourself randomly. تمام؟ أو الطهارة لنحو الصلاة مما لا يباح إلا بالوضوء. Or you intend to purify yourself for an act that needs wudu, like tawaf. Tawaf needs wudu, right? So I go to make my wudu, and in my heart, I'm intending what? I'm doing this wudu, this tahara, this purification. I don't like the word ablution. This purification for my tawaf. Yes, that niyyah is sound. Tamam? He says, أو استباحة مفتقر إلى الوضوء. This istibaha, this is the niyyah of the person of رفع الحدث. عفوا, دائم الحدث. The person has دوام الحدث, continuous impurity. This is the niyyah that he uses. Istibaha. He does what? Istibaha. Meaning, he's saying, oh Allah, please accept my act, okay, and allow me to pray. Because he's not actually lifting the state of impurity. Tamam. He says, كالصلاة ومس المصحف. يعني, a person, not دائم الحدث, not a person with continuous release of impurity, but a regular person without any issue, medical issues, can they intend استباحة ما يفتقر إلى وضوء? Meaning, I intend by this act for Allah to allow me. Can a regular person use that? Yes, they can. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Because the act that they are doing istibaha for is muftaqir. It needs what? It needs the wudu. ولا تكفي نية استباحة ما يندب له الوضوء كقراءة القرآن والحديث وكذا دخول مسجد وزيارة قبر. Now, there are things that it is recommended that you have your wudu. You can do wudu for those things. But if your niyyah specifies those things only, and you can't pray with it. Why? Because wudu was only recommended for them. So you made wudu with the understanding and the assumption that the wudu was simply a recommendation. So it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you, do this act as an obligation, and you said, no, I'm doing it as a recommendation. Then it doesn't count. It counts for what you intended for, but it doesn't count for anything else beyond that. So if I make wudu, for example, to read hadith, when he says qira'at Quran, he doesn't mean touch it. He means just reciting. If I make wudu just to recite, not to touch, I can't pray with that wudu. I cannot pray with that wudu. And the simplest thing when it comes to wudu is just stick with the very first one. Don't complicate yourself. The Sharia did not ask you to give this thorough, detailed intention. It didn't ask you to do that. You get yourself in trouble with things when you start adding things into your intention that the Sharia never asked you for. So don't do what the Sharia didn't ask you for. Stick to what the Sharia said. إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ. You intend to make tahara to fulfill your prayer that you're about to pray. It's time for Fajr. I'm making my wudu for my Fajr prayer. مثلا يعني. Or I'm making my wudu so that way I can pray my fard. I'm making my wudu to pray my fard. Simple and basic. And again, you don't have to say it. It's in the heart. Now, the author does not speak about saying the niyyah verbally here. He will mention in salah, the author, Jazahullah khair jazaa'ul ihsan, he doesn't like to repeat himself. And that's beneficial for us. But we too have to point these things out. So, saying it verbally helps you remind yourself, but it's not a requirement. It's a recommended act. But realistically, anything can be a recommended act if it's going to help your obligation. So if writing it down helps you, you want to put a clipboard in the bathroom or next to the sink where you sign it, you write down what you're going to make wudu for. Hey, if that helps you disconnect from the dunya, alhamdulillah, go for it. It doesn't, khalas, don't do that one. You want to put an ab reminder on your calendar? Go for it. You want to write yourself on your notepad? Do it. Any little act that you can do to perfect your ibadah, tawakkal ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, why not? Tamam. The Prophet ﷺ used to do it. You know, he would, when he was fasting, or like a sunnah, he would say loud in his home. So everyone can know at home, so they don't make food and give him food. Allahumma inni sayim. He didn't have to do that. So if there's a little benefit that helps you, helps those around you, whatever it might be, go ahead and use it. And that's where the fuqaha, they speak about التلفظ بالنية. تمام? He says, وَالْأَصْلُ فِي وُجُوبِ النِّيَّةِ, meaning all niyyas, the primary evidence to state that they are an obligation is the khabar إنما الأعمال بالنيات. That's متفق عليه بين الشيخين, يعني البخاري ومسلم. That إنما الأعمال بالنيات ولكل امرئ ما نوى فمن كانت هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله ومن كان هجرته إلى دنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. It's a famous hadith. إنما الأعمال بالنيات. إنما is in Arabic is called أداة حصر. That means everything that follows is going to be limited to that which follows after that. So إنما الأعمال, all أعمال are held to or against what? بالنيات, held against their niyyah, or they'll be judged based upon their intent. Al-a'mal, what a'mal? Because then one might say, a niyyah is amal. Does my niyyah need a niyyah? That's like saying my basmillah needs a basmillah. No, there are a few things that are considered the point zero, nothing comes before it. Tamam, the square one where we're going to start from. So even though that, for example, the Prophet ﷺ says, كل أمر ذي بال لا يبدأ فيه ببسم الله فهو أبتر. Any matter or concerning effort that matters Islamically should begin with the name of Allah. It does not mean that if I'm going to recite the Fatiha, I need to say Bismillah. There's already a Bismillah there. So not everything necessarily needs a Bismillah. Then what does al-a'mal here mean? The actions, all actions. That's what the word is. What is it referring to? Well, we can take the alif and lam in al-a'mal, and really, instead of applying it to al-jins or al-istighraq, apply it to al-ahd. Apply it to al-ahd. What's al-ahd? Something that we are familiar with, something we know that he's referring to per the continuation of the hadith, right? The continuation of the hadith specifies what kind of acts. That was a physical act. So we can automatically here understand, oh, it's physical acts. All physical acts require an intention, and they will be judged and valued based upon their intention. تمام? He says, أي إنما صحتها وكمالها. عفوا لا كمالها. يعني that these acts will be considered valid based upon their intention. تمام? He says ويجب قرنها, يعني it must be done, initiated at when? عند أول غسل جزء من الوجه. The first obligatory act of wudu is the washing of the face. That is the first obligatory act of wudu. Everything before that was sunnah. The basmala, the suwak, the washing of the hands up into the wrists. Okay? All of that is sunnah. My intention here will begin where? When I wash my face. Well, wait a minute. Can I begin it before that? Yes, you can begin it before that. Well, if I start it here, do I get rewarded for my sunnah acts? There's a khilaf between the ulama on this. Some ulama say yes, because those sunnah acts are connected to these obligatory acts, so they will be rewarded because it's part of it. Other ulama said, well, we don't know. And in that case, it might be better that you intend that you're doing the sunnah acts. But then this then causes a problem. What problem? Now we're going to have to do multiple niyyahs. Well, that's a problem, right? Although, since how we describe niyyah is just simply the intent that you have in your heart, it's technically there. Why else are you washing your hands, doing madmada and istinshaq? right? Or using the siwak. You're doing it because you're about to make wudu. So the intent is already there technically. So even if we say you have to do a niyyah for the sunan, it's already there. Why else are you doing those acts, right? That's what Imam al-Haramain usually says. He says, well, it's already there. Why else are you doing it? Yani, people don't normally just go and make madmad and istinshaq, right? Maybe washing of the hands, one might argue, or brushing of the teeth, one might argue, but madmad and istinshaq, you don't really normally see people going around doing madmad and istinshaq. So because that's the case, yani, he'll say you don't need to make another intention. But again, as I said, other ulama said you ought to make intention. Wallah al-musta'an. So he goes on here and he says, فَلَوْ قَرَنَهَا بِأَثْنَائِهِ كَفَى وَوَجَبَ إِعَادَةُ غَسْلِ مَا سَبَقَهَا. Now, if you initiate the niyyah of wudu before washing of the face, that's fine. However, it needs to be present on your mind, in your heart, when you get to the face. Okay? It must be. If it isn't, if your mind absent, heart absent, once you get to your face, it technically does not count. So you would have to rewash the face, which means if you start washing your face and you're halfway through and then you remember your intention, the part that you washed before you realize, that's going to have to be washed again. That's going to have to be washed again. ولا يكفي قرنها بما قبله حيث لم يستصحبها إلى غسل شيء منه. You can't initiate your niyyah. You can't initiate your niyyah before you get to your face unless you have it or you keep it present to getting until you start with the face. Once you start the face, you can start going mind absent. It's just that its presence and washing the face need to coincide. That's the whole point. وَمَا قَارَنَهَا هُوَ أَوَّلُهُ. So as long as it's present and he gets to wash the face, then that's the beginning of the obligatory niyyah and the obligations of the wudu. فتفوت سنة المضمضة إن انغسل معها شيء من الوجه كحمرة الشفة بعد النية. Now, starting your obligatory niyyah ahead of time causes confusion for a lot of people, especially people that can tell the difference between what's obligatory and what's sunnah. Tamam? So if I'm doing madmada and istinshaq, I started my obligatory niyyah at the beginning, at the start of my sunan, and it's present in my heart. And I go to do madmada, there's water all over my face right here, right? So technically speaking, my obligatory intention has already initiated when I wash this part of my face. So it causes confusion, all right? And then people start to wonder, okay, well, when I wash it again, wouldn't that be washing this part 4 times? If I do 3 times, and if I do 4 times, that's considered disliked. What do I do? Of course, again, people are confusing themselves by overthinking things. But there's a solution. What's the solution? He says, فَالْأَوْلَى أَن يُفَرِّقَ النِّيَّةِ. Why? Oh, pay attention to what he said in his last sentence. فَتَفُوتُ سُنَّةِ الْمَضْمَضَةِ. If I am intending the obligatory, right, and I go like this, and the water hit my face, then my madmada doesn't count. The washing of my mouth, it's not going to count. Why? Because I already washed my face. You see, we have to maintain order. I've already washed my face. So my madmada that I'm doing, and I'm washing part of my face right here, it doesn't count. Because I've already washed the face. We have to maintain order. Madmada comes before the face. I've washed the face. See, these are the dilemmas that people usually, when they start overthinking points, they fall into, and now the fuqaha need to come up with a response, so they start looking at the details technically. But the solution is فَالْأَوْلَى لَهُ أَن يُفَرِّقَ النِّيَّةِ. Okay, this is called تَفْرِيقِ النِّيَّةِ عَلَى أَعْضَاءِ الْوُضُوءِ. Don't give a general niyyah, do an particular niyyah for each part. I'm washing in my heart, my intent. I'm washing my hands, sunnah of wudu. I'm doing madmada and istinshaq for wudu. I'm using my siwak or my toothbrush, sunnah of wudu. I'm washing my face, the obligatory act of washing my face in wudu. It's in my heart. So I'm breaking down the intention like that. I'm washing my arm like that. I'm doing my ears that are sunnah, and so on. Tamam. And if you break down the niyyah, you'll never get yourself confused. And again, the niyyah is just the intent being present in your heart. بأن ينوي عند كل من غسل الكفين والمضمضة والاستنشاق سنة الوضوء ثم فرض الوضوء عند غسل الوجه وهكذا حتى لا تفوته فضيلة استصحاب النية من أوله. And then that way your niyyah is present throughout the wudu. So this is like a double bonus across your niyyah is present in everything, and you're maintaining your niyyah throughout your wudu from beginning to end. وفضيلة المضمضة والاستنشاق مع انغسال حمرة الشفة. So in that case, when I say I'm doing madmada and I intend, or my action right now, the intent behind it is do madmada and istinshaq, which is sunnah of wudu. Washing that part of the face is not going to take effect yet until I actually get to that step. And that's a solution that they presented. And there's a lot of discussion on tafriqi a'dha al-wudu, but that'll take some scuba diving, so we're not going to get into that right now. Next, he says, وَثَانِيهَا, and the second obligatory act of wudu, غَسْلُ ظَاهِرُ وَجْهِ, washing the ظاهر of the wajh. Why is he using the word ظاهر? So no one thinks that you have to wash the mouth. We already did that, but that's not the obligation. That was sunnah. Or washing inside of your eyes. No, don't do that. As a matter of fact, if it hurts you, don't even attempt it. It might be haram, it might be makruh. Tamam. And the nose was sunnah. So you're not going to do that. So zahir is just the apparent of what you see of the face. لِآيَت, for the ayah, فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. In the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, wash your faces. The Arabs, they say, إِنَّمَا سُمِّيَ الْوَجْهُ وَجْهًا لِأَنَّ بِهِ تَقَعُ الْمُوَاجَهَةِ. The wajh is called a wajh because with it I do things face to face. Not everything in Arabic has a wajh, even if I call something its wajh. So when I say wajh al-jabal, it's what I'm looking at. Wajh al-nahar, it's just the beginning of the nahar. I don't come and say, and therefore I affirm that the mountain has a face, or that the daytime has a face. No, that doesn't make sense. The face of the mountain is whatever you're facing. So, because the word wajh in Arabic just means ما يواجه به, يعني what is used to face or confront or come before or in advance of, or the first thing. That's what the term wajh is used for. So when I look at you and you look at me, there's an outlining that takes place. And we refer to that as the face, and that's literally what we consider as the face that's going to be washed. He says, وَهُوَ, and he's going to speak about that defining point. وَهُوَ طُولًا, top to bottom, مَا بَيْنِ مَنَابِتِ شَعْرِ رَأْسِهِ غَالِبًا. He's saying غَالِبًا because if you've lost some of the hair up here like myself, then يعني, I might start looking for another hairline. No, we're talking about غَالِبًا, يعني averagely. Where does the hairline begin? It begins right at the top of the forehead, so it begins from there. وَتَحْتِ مُنْتَهَى لَحْيَيْهِ, that's right here, right above the neck, right under the chin. This is called a lihya, this is called a lihya. Together they form a lahyayni. Tamam. Where does it start? It starts right under the sideburn, right under the arid. Some fuqaha include the arid into the beard, but the mu'tamad is no, this is a separate part. So from right here, from top of the jawbone, all the way to right here, these two parts are called al-lahyayni. The hair on them is called al-lihya. Not the hair on the anfaqa. This is called anfaqa, right under the bottom lip. We'll explain the facial hairs in a moment. Okay, so muntaha al-lahyayn would be where the lahyayn meet, at the end of it, right above the neck. Right above the Adam's apple for men, right? Or slightly above that. وَعَرْضًا مَا بَيْنَ أُذُنَيْهِ, and from side to side, what's in between the ears, not including the ears. Even the white spot between the sideburn and the ear, that's part of the face. But the earlobe, nope, that's the ending part. The ears are not included in the definition of the face. He says, وَيَجِبُ غَسْلُ شعر الوجه. You have to wash all facial hair. من هدب. والهدب ما هو? It's your eyelashes, your رموش, eyelashes. وحاجب, that's your eyebrow. وشارب, mustache, male brothers and sisters. All right, that goes for everyone. وعنفقة, and that's the hair under the يعني under the bottom lip. And these are the subulani, ends of the mustache. They're called subulani. They need to be washed too. ولحية, and I already explained the lihya. He's going to define it for us. And he says, وهو ما نبت على الذقن, that which grows on the chin. But what about this part right here? By definition, it's part of the lihyain, but it's not part of the lihya. The lihya, according to the Shafi'iyya, is the chin. يعني when we're speaking about hair, it's the what's on the chin only. That's the lihya. Not the anfaqa, not the sharib, not the subulan, not the arid, and not sha'r al-lihyain, and not cheek hair as well. None of that is called lihya. He says على الذقن. What is the dhaqn? He says وهو مجتمع اللحيين, where both lihyas meet, the chin area. And when we say chin, we mean starting from under the anfaqa, not from the bottom lip, no, under the anfaqa, all the way to the beginning of the neck. So that would be the lihya. Tamam. So if someone has a goatee, is that a lihya? Yes, that's a lihya. By definition, that is a lihya. وعذار. العذار, he says, وهو ما نبت على العظم المحاذي للأذن. Al-'idhar is the hair right above your ears. So it's basically right above your arid, right above the sideburns, right above it. All right, and it's muwazi لماذا? للأذنين. It's slightly above, but slightly next to at the same time. Tamam, and you can look, it's right here. And I will send a diagram, inshallah ta'ala, explaining and pointing to these things a little bit more. وعارض وهو من حط عنه. That's what extends from the idhar all the way to al-lihya. That's al-aridain or al-aridan. ومن الوجه, and parts of the face, حمرة الشفتين. Basically the lips. Not inside, not your gums, not your mouth, but just your exterior part of the lips. وموضع الغمم وهو ما نبت عليه الشعر من الجبهة. Some people have hair on their forehead and it will extend. يعني its growth is actually from the forehead area. If its growth is from the head, that hair needs to be lifted and you need to wash underneath. But if it's growing on the forehead itself, that needs to be washed. دون محل التحذيف وهو على الأصح ما نبت عليه الشعر الخفيف بين ابتداء العذار والنزعة. Okay, let me see. Give me one moment. Bismillah. I actually have it right here. Bismillah. Okay. محل التحذيف is a portion of the face and head that the Arabs used to trim and cut in order to make the face look bigger. Imam al-Haramain says, if you want to determine where that spot is, this is what you need to do. You take one tip of your sibha. This is literally how Imam al-Haramain used to do it in his class. So we are technically transmitting this by sanad. You take your sibha and you put one tip at the beginning of your hairline and you put the other one to the tip of your ear. Tamam. What's on the side of the face is part of the face, and that's what the Arabs would shave off to make the face look bigger. And what's on the side of the head is part of the head, and that just falls under that which is wiped, not that which is washed in the wudu. Tamam, and that's called mahall al-ta'dif. He says, وَهُوَ مَنْ we already read that sentence. He says, دُونَ وَتَدِ الْأُذُنِ. As I said, the ears are not included in the face. والنزعتان أو النزعتين عفوا وهما بياضان يكتنفان الناصية. These are naz'atan, right up here. It's next to your temples. Those are part of the head. وموضع الصلع زحلتي, يعني the area where your hairline maybe has receded, That's not part of the face, that's part of the head. وهو ما بينهما إذا انحصر عنه الشعر. ويسن غسل ما قيل إنه من الوجه. نعم. So this is the statement of Ibn Hajar. He says, and everything that has been argued for that it is part of the wajh, meaning, and we don't consider it part of the wajh, tamam, it's sunnah to wash. Really, there's no parts left, really, per se, but it's a general principle. In some of the copies of this book, instead of writing it like that, it says, وَيُسَنُّ غَسْلُ كُلِّ مَا قِيلَ إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنَ الْوَجْهِ. Also a correct statement. Some people argue that's not correct, but it's also correct, that it's sunnah to wash anything that was said that was not from the face. Also technically correct, because we say it's not from the face, but someone else might. And realistically, the only thing that, or the only things that are going to be mentioned here is how far over the ears do you go, and is part of the wajh. That's one thing. Number two is the argument of some schools that al-udhunaini are part of the face. And this is why many of our ashab will say what? It's recommended that you wipe your ears when you're washing your face. So you're washing your face once, just a quick wipe. And then that way, for that other opinion that argues that you have to wash your ears while you're washing your face, you're fulfilling it to a certain extent. This is what we call khurujan min al-khilaf, departing from the discourse on the matter. Some of the ulama have that opinion. That's fine. I do it anyway. And then that way, we're not getting into any arguments or debates or frustrations or anything like that. He says afterwards, وَيَجِبُ غَسْلِ ظَاهِرْ وَبَاطِنْ كُلٌّ مِّنَ الشُّعُورِ السَّابِقَةِ. You need to wash all the hairs of the face that we've mentioned, وَإِنْ كَثُفَ, even if they're thick. So deep within and the exterior. لِنُدْرَةِ الْكَثَافَةِ فِيهَا, even if they're thick, because thickness is rare. And there's a qa'idah here. And when I say qa'idah or an asl, that's something for you to memorize. That's something for you to follow and understand, because that is a foundational concept that impacts our school. So there's a qa'idah here. It says what? The qa'idah, it says, النادر لا حكم له. Those that have rare exceptions to the rule, they don't have a fundamental, universal concept that they follow. We will assess them on a circumstantial basis, but normally they would have to follow the rule exactly how it's stated. But let's use an example. A woman has a beard. We're going to read right now where he's going to say a thick beard, you don't have to get water deep into it, because we have a rukhsah from the Prophet ﷺ. But a woman having a beard is something rare. They say she has to wash it, and deep inside. She doesn't get to use that rukhsah. Why? Because women having beards is something rare. So she would not fall under the universal rule of or exception that might be there. She would have to follow the rule as is. But this woman, she can't shave up. Now we're going to get into a circumstantial issue, and we'll address her individual case. But rare exceptions, rare scenarios, they don't have universal rules. They follow the law as is, unless there's an excessive hardship, then we'll address it on a case-to-case basis. These qawa'id are very, very important to understand how our school functions. He says, لا باطن كثيف لحية وعارض. See how he's separating lihya and arid? Why is he separating it? Because as I told you in the beginning, we don't consider the sideburns as part of the beard. Tamam? So when we have an exception, like you don't have to wash deep in a thick beard, would it include the arid? Yes or no? They had a khilaf, because we normally look at them separately, but then they eventually relied on and agreed upon that we will treat the arid the same as we will treat the lihya, due to their proximity, but nothing else. Okay, and it's not only their proximity. Realistically, one of them said because usually their thickness is they're the same in thickness. Whereas a mustache won't be, or the anfaqa won't really get that thick as yani someone having a big beard. And the Prophet ﷺ had a decent sized beard, and he would, after washing the face, he would take a handful of water and just run it in underneath. If anyone has any questions as we're speaking, feel free to put them, inshallah ta'ala, right into the Telegram group. He says, وَالْكَثِيف. Now he's going to give you the ta'rif, the dhabit, the way to identify a thick beard from a thin beard. وَالْكَثِيفُ مَا لَمْ تَرَى الْبَشْرَةُ مِنْ خِلَالِهِ فِي مَجْلِسِ التَّخَاطُبِ عُرْفًا. If you and I are sitting in front of each other having a conversation, it's called majlis takhatub. So we're in a near proximity. Not in a distance where we're shouting at each other, no, a distance where we're speaking normally, at a normal volume. If I can see the skin under your beard, then your lihya is khafif. If I cannot, then it's khafif. If it's khafif, then you need to, while you're washing your face, get the water deep in. If it's kathif, if it's thick, you just, after you wash your face, you take the handfuls of water and you put it underneath your beard and run your fingers through it. That's all you have to do. Tamam. This exception does not apply to eyebrows, eyelashes, not the mustache, not the anfaqa, not the subulan. No, just to the lihya and to the aridan. Tamam. And you're going to take that water, you're going to run it through and run your fingers through your beard. That's it. That's the way that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to do it. Now he's going to give us a qa'idah, very important qa'idah. This is another qa'idah that is important in the school. وَيَجِبُ غَسْلُ مَا لَا يَتَحَقَّقُ غَسْلُ جَمِيعِهِ إِلَّا بِغَسْلِهِ لِأَنَّ مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ واجب. There's your qa'idah. مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ واجب. What is needed by necessity to fulfill an obligation is an obligation as well. Tamam. He says anything that you need to wash in order to fulfill the command, then it's necessary that you wash it as well. What does this even mean? Imagine someone has a growth on their face or on their nose, and they need to wash all around it. And this is going to be wajib. And wash the growth itself. Tamam. Why? Because washing everything that's in the boundaries of the face is wajib. So washing that growth is also now what? Wajib. Tamam? Now we're going to move on to the hands. And if you'll notice, if you're looking at the book or even the Arabic translation, it's one of the shortest ones ever. And everything we say here is going to apply to the feet as well. And the rules of it are very, very simple, even before we read it. You have to wash your arm from your fingertips up into and with your elbows slightly above. That's mahall al-fard. We go slightly above. Why? Because ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. And in order for me to be certain that I've washed my arm, I need to go up a little bit. Tamam? Tamam. If I lost some of my arm, I have to wash the rest. I lost the arm at the joint, then the rest of the joint, because when I said up into and with the elbow is two parts. It's a joint. So if it was cut at the joint, there's still the rest of the joint. If my arm got cut above that, then it's just sunnah to touch it with water. If I have an extra finger, I still need to wash it. If I have an extra hand that grew out of my arm, I'm going to have to wash that too because it's in it. That simple. And whatever I just said right here applies over to the foot. Well, what if I have a wound that's cut open? I'm not going to put water in that. I'm going to keep that covered. Okay, well, what if I have a dent that happened in my arm? You know, I got an impact once and now there's a dent. Well, you're still going to wash the skin. Well, what if it's not the skin, but it's flesh? Okay, well, hold on. If it's a wound, then you're going to cover it. But what if that part of you, it developed this weird deformity, and it looks like it's a hole, but it's actually sealed up and it somewhat looks like the skin is over it. You're going to have to wash it. What if there's a growth? You're going to have to wash it. It's that simple. And the same thing applies to the feet. Tamam? But instead of elbow, obviously, it would be what? The ankle bone. Up and to and with. Same rules apply here, apply here. لا فارق. The dalil for it is the ayah. وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. وأيديكم إلى المرافق. But it says only two. Why are you saying up to and with? إلى here means مع. Because the only way to do إلى would include it. So in order to include it, you would have to wash it. تمام؟ بسيطة. The same thing what? وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. He says وثالثها غسل يديه من كفيه وذراعيه بكل مرفق للآية. ويجب غسل جميع ما في محل الفرج. You have to wash everything in the area that you're obligated to wash. من شعر وظفر nails وإن طال even if they are long. تمام. He says after that فرع. See, he's already done. He doesn't even cover the details that I gave you. Why? Because they realistically all fall back onto those same set of rules, and they're really simple to remember. And by him saying ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب kind of gives you a good intro for anything involved in that chapter. But now he brings up a very beautiful point. He says فرع لو نسي لمعة. You forgot a little part. لمعة, just empty spot, one spot. فانغسلت في تثليث أو إعادة وضوء لنسيان له لا تجديد واحتياط أجزأه. ممتاز. You made wudu. You step out of the restroom and you look and you say, oh wow, this part is dry. I didn't wash this. What do? In that scenario that I gave you, you're going to go back and make wudu. You're going to go back and make wudu. That's why he says أو إعادة وضوء لنسيان له. تمام. Or when you make wudu, normally your hair on your arm, or there's certain signs that you remember that you made wudu, but you're looking at a limb and you're seeing it's dry and you said, no, I'm going to go make wudu. Nisyan lahu here could be either because you are making wudu because you remember that part that you missed, or you don't remember if you have wudu altogether. Or you were going to do everything once, but then you realized while you're still in wudu that your arm, for example, you didn't do that. So you say, no, I'm going to go back to the arms and I'm going to do everything 3 times. That's good. Redoing wudu, that suffices it. But if you go with the intent of tajdeed al-wudu, that's not going to work. Because you didn't have wudu in the first place, because you missed that part. Even that little part, yes. And we have from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in Musi' al-Salah, where the Prophet ﷺ sends the man several times for missing part of his heel. Tamam. And the guy goes and he makes wudu and he comes back and the Prophet ﷺ says, go again, you didn't do it right. You didn't do it right. Tamam. He says, وَاحْتِيَاطٍ أَجْزَأُ لَا تَجْدِيدٍ وَاحْتِيَاطٍ. Ihtiyat means I'm intending to make wudu because I don't know if I have wudu or not. That niyyah does not work. That niyyah does not work. Even Imam al-Nawawi says, no. Go break your wudu and then go make wudu. Tamam. Break your wudu, yani go relieve yourself, go to the bathroom. And then that way you can have an intent based upon certainty. Because once you have doubt, that's not going to work. Oh, but look, wait a minute, do I have my wudu? I don't know. You know what? I'm just going to make wudu. That's different. Because I'm not making wudu because I have doubt. I'm just simply making wudu. So if you're in doubt, no, go in with the intention to make wudu. Not, oh, well, if I have it, okay. If I don't have it, well, this is for it. Never intend that, because that's uncertainty in the niyyah, and it negates what niyyah means. Tamam? He says, وَرَابِعُهَا مَسْحُ بَعْضِ رَأْسِهِ, wiping some of the head. He says, كَالنَّزْعَةِ, naz'a would be the part up here, right? That's close to the temple. وَالْبَيَاضِ الَّذِي وَرَاءَ الْأُذُنِ, area behind the ears, that's still part of the ra's. بَشَرًا أو بشر عفوا أو شعر في حده, any skin or hair within the area of the hair. But what's the area of the hair? It begins from your hairline all the way to the end of the back hairline. and from over one ear, behind one ear, to behind the other ear. If you're wondering, they don't normally say it because they assume, I believe, that everyone knows where their head begins and ends. Now bear in mind, the part that you're wiping needs to be from there and in there. Meaning, if you have long hair and you take the strand and you extend it, the part of it that goes beyond the boundary of the head and outwards, you can't wipe that. It needs to be the part that's still within the boundary of the head. Tamam? Or else in Arabic that's not called mash al-ra's, that's called mash al-nazil min al-ra's. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. So you want to stay in the ra's, not something that extends from the ra's. He says, وَلَوْ بَعْضُ شَعْرَةٍ أو بعض شعرة, even if some of a strand. He says للآية قال الآية وامسحوا برؤوسكم قال البغوي ينبغي ألا يجزئ أقل من قدر الناصية وهي ما بين النزعتين. يعني you would have to have a bare minimum of this area right here. تمام? This is called the ناصية. Why is he saying that? He says لأنه صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يمسح أقل منها. In the famous hadith, النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مسح بناصيته. He wiped on his ناصية. And Imam al-Baghawi argued that that should be the bare minimum of the بعض. تمام? He says وهو رواية عن أبي حنيفة رحمه الله تعالى والمشهور عنه وجوب مسح الربع. Sayyidina Abu Hanifa, Imam al-A'zam, he said the bare minimum is a quarter of the head. In our school, it's exactly what he said the first time, even if it's some of one strand. Even if it's some of one strand. Imam al-Nawawi in al-Majmu', he quotes the one strand opinion as a bare minimum, and then he quotes the three strand opinion as a bare minimum. He quotes the quarter, and he quotes, I think the last one I did mention here in my notes is Allahumma salli Sayyidina Muhammad. We said قل ما قيل ولو بعض, wiping it all. And he says realistically there is no evidence for an amount. There's no evidence for an amount. This means we're going to have to fall back on the qaida, the rule that states al-aghdhu bi-aqalli ma qil. What would the bare minimum of what we can call wiping the head constitute wiping the head? And therefore there comes the mu'tamad as the bare minimum. If I were to wipe a strand, is that called in Arabic masahtu bi ra'si? The answer is yes. So that would be suffice. Tamam? That's our evidence for that. وخامسها غسل رجليه بكل كعب مع كل رجل للآية, for the آية, أو مسح خفيهما بشروطه. And we'll speak about المسح الخفين soon inshallah ta'ala. Let me just check our time real quick. Our time is up. All right, let's just see right here. He says ويجب غسل باطن ثقب وشق. Again, he didn't expand on the hands. He didn't expand that much on the feet. Nor did he do on the hands. It was the same thing. Yani, as I told you, the laws and the rules are the same. If it's some of the foot, you have to wash the rest. If it's at the joint, then you still have to wash the joint. If it's above the joint, then it's only sunnah to tap it with water. And all the other rules apply. He even mentions the thaqb and the shaq. Thaqb, hole, shaq, cut, that yani is bruised, maybe be an indentation in the skin. You'll have to wash that as well. All right, we'll stop right here, inshallah ta'ala, at this far' bi'idhnillah, and in our next class we'll go over the tartib and then we'll probably go after that into the sunan bi'idhnillah ta'ala. But next class, what I'll also do, because he doesn't get too much into Masah al-Khuffayn in the book, I will do a brief breakdown for Masah al-Khuffayn bi'idhnillah ta'ala for everyone and all the rules that are there. And yes, we'll speak about socks. Here we'll stop inshallah ta'ala. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.